feel so alone, do we? And that's what's important to me. And I think that's what's important to men. At least all men who've had the opportunity to really look at women as the overinflated commodity they voluntarily make themselves out to be. Stardust is right, in my opinion, when he says that men are plagued by this feeling of isolation coming from the fact that we know we're alone. Society doesn't bend over backwards to hide the fact that men are alone so that men feel better about themselves. We know we're alone. We'll go homeless if we don't pay our bills. And so we place this extraordinary value on things like human connection and intellectual discourse and discovery. Imagine an intelligent alien observer looking at the technological progression of our species. He will, of course, notice that the vast majority of technological discovery came from men, and also that throughout our history, a technological obsession we've had is to quench this aloneness we feel by communicating knowledge with other men. And, this has been the case from our very first cave paintings all the way to present day, where men have created mass media and instant worldwide communication. And even this isn't enough to quench our loneliness. As we look into the cosmos with satellite arrays built with the singular intention of answering the question, are we alone? Our problem as men is in how we approach our need to satiate this loneliness with women. That is, we seek to project our appreciation of these lapses in isolation onto the female, when the human female appreciates no such thing. We build this elaborate fantasy in our heads that me and my girl against the world mentality, and we mistakenly believe that because this female satiates our loneliness, because of this, we project the value we place on that onto the woman. But as Stardust said in a previous video, women have the board consensus, the in-group gender preference, the you go girl no matter how wrong you are sisterhood, as well as society at large, willing to satiate their loneliness. They place no value on something that's so readily available to them. You see, women are perfectly happy pretending they aren't alone, so long as everybody else pretends along with them. And in this respect, men are far too rational a creature to accept this mental gymnastic. We know we're alone as far as society is concerned. But ironically, this gives rise to our very own male self-deception. We know society doesn't give a shit about us. But somewhere in the world, maybe there exists some incorruptible Madonna. And she's going to rescue us from our solitude, and men will believe this mythology, and women will exploit this chink in our armor, and so will the state. And this is why it's so important that men place more interest in fighting this aloneness with intellectual pursuits between men, instead of mythologies that project our value of these lapses in isolation onto the women we have romantic interest in. Now, I've dated and fucked women that were undeniably attractive by any societal standard. And I've dated virgins, the good Christian women and all that. And I've dated promiscuous women that were absolute nymphomaniac freaks that needed to be pretend raped just to get off. And do you know what I remember about these women? Even their faces are starting to get a bit fuzzy when I try to picture them in my head. The only thing that I can summon up when recalling them to memory is that they all viewed me as a man first and a human being last, if they ever saw me that way in the first place. But the people that truly looked at me as a human being, not as a provider, not as a protector, not as an ATM machine, the people that shared their humanity with me, and this is both male and female, I can tell you where it happened, I can tell you when it happened, I can tell you their exact body language, I can tell you the inflection of their voice, I can tell you everything as clear as the day it happened. And so this is what men going their own way really seek, in my opinion. We are men, throwing off the fake hypocritical shackles that society has placed on us simply because we happen to be men. And frankly, the only women we have respect for have the same qualities as the only men we have respect for. That is, those women that affirm and respect our humanity instead of denigrating and capitalizing off our manhood. Now, if you're one of these women who absolutely needs to descend back to your primitive female compulsions, then, you better learn to get content with getting a good, hard, animalistic fucking and be done with it. But once you try to exploit us, that being financially or emotionally or however, once you try to exploit us because you can't keep your female biology in check, then don't be fucking surprised when we treat you as nothing more than a walking dick receptacle, and don't think for a second that we can't recognize it. You see, you're dealing with a new breed of man. We know when you're trying to play us, and unlike your blue pill tradcon manginas and male feminists, we'll gladly exploit you right back and not lose a drop of sleep over it. And another thing I want to address before I move on is this influx of women coming into our movement, masquerading as allies to our cause that are nothing more than tradcon parasitic frauds that are panicking because men are finally starting to walk off the plantation. I'm seeing a lot of this nonsense, this bullshit popping up around the manosphere lately. And of course, this dumb shit is almost always followed by a retinue of one blowjob away manginas heaping praise over these attention whores, and all because women see that feminism is slowly but surely collapsing, and now, how convenient that now you want to make sandwiches and hand out blowjobs. Bitch, I see you. I know exactly what you are, and you can keep your sandwiches, and I'll get plenty of blowjobs without ever having to pay even one of your bills. Do not fall for this, man. Do not fall for this. This trend that we see, and I know we all see it, it indicates to us that men going their own way are doing exactly what they need to do and should only ramp up their efforts. Now, I've always been clear that I don't mind women in this movement. But remember, if you watch my Nawalt video, I'll put that in the description box. I predicted this years ago. I knew there would be a bunch of women trying to infect this movement with their traditionalist garbage, hold firm, and stay on course. You know, certain elements in the manosphere that shouldn't have been here in the first place, they're getting scared in the manosphere. They don't know what they're going to do about Stardust and Barbarossa. They're getting scared that men going their own way has grown to encompass and spread into every facet of the manosphere. They can no longer ignore us, so prepare for an attempt to co-opt. Just hold firm, stay the course. We're on the right track. Now, with all that said, let's switch topics real quick. I want to talk about how much progress we can make legally. What are the stopgaps in place that's going to inhibit our progress in the legal sphere? I believe that society, I've said this in previous videos, will always bail out women first. If you're like me and you accept that society will always bail out women, it will become apparent that the legal progress we can make will be at odds with our society's innate desire to prioritize women's well-being. This means that in terms of legal advancement, we will at most be able to achieve change with only the most draconian and blatant institutionalized hypocrisies. Meaning that we may be able to get lifetime alimony removed, for example. Because this is one of those things that are in fact so blatantly unfair that with enough persistence, we just may be able to successfully challenge it based on the obvious unfair and archaic nature of alimony payments in a world where women can work and find jobs just like men can. So we might be able to address certain issues here and there, but I believe it's impossible to combat any legislation that deals with women's safety. For example, take this article here that's been floating around the manosphere, and that's in the description box, and the title is Government Shutdown, 9 Million Moms and Babies at Risk as Women, Infant and Children Program Halts. Now remember, in a previous video, I mentioned that things like WIC programs, these legislations are what really expose the underlying biological motivations behind Western civilization. This article, again, read the title. Millions of moms and babies at risk. No politician will touch this. I don't care if he's the most leftmost or rightmost politician in the world. No politician will touch this. These kind of headlines. This is what's going to end the government shutdown in the United States. No government official will say what's obviously true. And that is that these WIC programs can't be sustained, that they are inherently discriminatory against the male half of the population. I mean, a politician might throw some lip service against these programs being cut, preceding them being cut for good. But when women and children start getting tossed out into the street, and it will go there, when camera crews start recording women and children going homeless because of some politicians' spending cuts, you will see some of the fastest political backpedaling in the history of politics. I guarantee it. Because, you see, what we're truly battling here isn't a fight for freedom. There is no freedom in Western civilization. Again, Malcolm X said it best. If you're a man and you want your freedom, you take it. You don't ask questions. You don't ask the governments. You don't ask any politicians. You don't vote for your freedom. You take it. And if you can't take it, you're not free. Bottom line. So if you're not living off in some cabin miles from civilization in complete self-sufficiency, you are, to varying degrees, in a state of codependency with the civilization and society you live in. And what we forget sometimes is that for all of our technological achievement, and for all of our culture and customs and nations and civilizations, we're still, fundamentally, a bunch of apes hurtling around on a ball of rock trying to figure out the best way to survive against nature and its elements. Civilizations are survival centers towards this end. And rights, as I've said in my video addressing natural rights, rights are merely survival strategies that can and will fall under a hierarchy of survival priorities. And one of these survival priorities is the protection of women and their children. And this is one of the strongest survival priorities of our species and is shared by both men and women. And this survival priority existed before human beings could even conceive the idea of the politician, much less the left or right-wing politician. This survival priority existed eons before our species could even conceptualize what a human right was. And so civilization has an array of various survival strategies that contribute to a fragile balancing act that gives us civilization as we know it. Very few of these survival strategies will win out over our ancient compulsion to protect women above all other things, especially not the concept of rights and freedoms, which is in its infancy as a survival strategy employed by human beings. And feminism is a manipulation of this protect women at all costs survival strategy, which is why any legal prescriptions designed to combat feminism will by default be limited in size and scope by this survival strategy. Now, this is not to say that legal progress cannot be made, but the main inhibitor of this legal process will be this survival priority. You can take that to the bank. Ultimately, what we're going to have to do is to either find a better manipulation of human nature than feminism has, or build a society and eventually a civilization around the most accurate possible interpretation of what makes the human animal work. And this admittedly is a daunting task since feminism has exploited human nature almost to perfection. Feminism, if we look at it as social machinery, is brilliantly complex and yet is also infinitely simple. It's got everything going for it and it has everything it needs to sustain itself built into it. It's completely self-assembling when the correct conditions are in place. Now, if you've ever seen a thermite reaction, thermite has its own oxygen built into its very own molecular structure. So once a catalyst, a flash of magnesium gets it going, it's almost impossible to stop. And your only real option is to stand back and give it its space and wait until the reaction consumes itself. Feminism, in many respects, is like social thermite. If certain social conditions align themselves correctly, and then we get a spark. In our case, traditionalism functioned as the fuel and the Industrial Revolution catalyzed the reaction, and now all we can really do is stand back, give it its space, and persuade the men observing to just stay as far away as possible. Politics is a band-aid. What men are not yet understanding is that a political approach to ending feminism is a voluntary stroll into stalemate, unless it's accompanied by a more important shift in cultural attitudes. One of our problems as men is that we're so action-oriented that we have a hard time recognizing a need for siege warfare when we see it. The very politicians that would allow the WIC services to expire, even if women ended up starving on the streets, are the very politicians that wouldn't last a second, and I mean a second, against a politician that's willing to smile in front of a camera and say, well, I am against welfare programs, but we can't allow women and children in need to go without government aid. And it's all bullshit, of course. There's no altruistic motivation behind this, since countless men are homeless and nobody's giving them a damn thing. No government aid is coming their way. So this is far from some humanitarian effort. This is the benefactor of women, the state, acting on behalf of women. It's that simple. Think about what really drives politics. I mean, what really motivates political change? Let's analyze that question. Every time you've seen some sweeping political change that is democratic in origin, and I'm not talking about the Democratic Party here, I'm just talking about democratic voting. If it's democratic in origin, especially these days, we don't see appeals to reason and logic based on rationality making sweeping political changes. We see emotion-driven rhetoric spewing from the mouths of politicians that excel at manipulating human emotion. I'll give you examples that I keep bringing up because they're just so fitting in this case. We saw all this business with the Patriot Act. Now, if someone sat your average American down and he said, okay, we're going to put these laws into place and they're here to protect you. And in order for us to protect you, we're going to take away this right and we're going to take away that right. And while we're at it, we'll just take away 3 other rights. This never happens. What we do see happen is that an appeal to base biological drives is made. You see, if we don't take away these freedoms, then a bunch of Muslim terrorists are going to bomb American buildings. They're going to kill you. And the public acquiesces to that all on its own, and the pro-idiots will thank the government for doing it while they're at it. What's powerful enough to end one of the most inherent American traditions and freedoms? That is the right to bear arms. What's strong enough to end that? What's strong enough to negate 200 plus years of the right to arm yourself in this country? Well, let a couple innocent kids get murdered by a big scary assault rifle. That's what's powerful enough to do it. Look at, for example, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I was always fascinated by this group. Look at how they're more than happy to advocate for laws that allow illegal checkpoints and random DUI inspections. And who cares? Who cares that it violates your Fourth Amendment? I mean, who cares if these mothers believe that less teenagers will die from drunk driving accidents?